They'll blanket you in Wi-Fi and profit off the radiation. Congregation collecting the people for that Satan. I keeps it blazing, cause I can read between the lines. I ain't blind, we unwind what they're really saying. Genetically modify what you're tasting. Don't need that cottage promise, so now you live up in your mom's basement. Redesign time so your mind is always wasted. Programmed to crave the basics. Keep the beta in stasis. Pay the state, kid. You're in debt for being born. Messengers are more than just the price for being warned. Don't be alarmed, disconnect from their machinations. Stop subscribing to the folly of own nations. Bone breaking ain't the answer, cause they seek the ownership of souls. Spread the seeds and watch them grow. Break the chains of control. Break the chains of control.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. Tonight we are so blessed to share space with someone who has become intimate with evil, has held the courage not to look away from its awful and fearful countenance, and has developed the fortitude with which to be able to understand the darkness well enough to bring it forth into the light, where it belongs. She has written and produced many heartbreaking and eye-opening views of the greatest enemy the world has possibly ever faced, and that is the Chinese Communist Party, the governing body of China. Precisely because she loves Chinese people and all people enough to dedicate herself to saving us all, Kay Rubacek has brought us many windows into the persecution of the people under the boots of torturous oppression. Kay, your work is stunning and beyond powerful, and I thank you so much for everything that you do and for coming here tonight to share it with us.
Wow, what an introduction, Lindsay. That was just amazing. I'm speechless.
you deserve all that and more, I'm sure. I really, really want people to understand this issue, but I also want them to understand how necessary it is that they go watch your films. And tonight we're mostly talking, or for me at least, about finding courage, because I haven't seen any of the others. But before we jump into it, I do like to remind people that rogue.locals.com is the place to be if you want to join the community, share information, check it out, interact with people. And you can also go to rogueways.org for all kinds of stuff from me. Readings, orgone pendants, autographed novels, all kinds of stuff. So go check out rogueways.org. And Kay, we always start with a little bit of lightheartedness, even for heavy subjects like this, with a pointless question of the episode. And I wanted to ask you, what uncommon thing would you like to see become more common in the world?
Ooh, that's a nice one. What uncommon thing? Wow, that could be like anything.
It could be anything physical, non-physical, wherever you want to go with it.
Well, you know what I was thinking about today is, like, I really like licorice, and I think more people should like it too, and I wish I could get it in more places. How about that?
That is awesome.
Enough.
Well, and people don't realize real licorice is actually good for you. You know, like it gets candied and we like it that way, but licorice itself has healing effects and really cool properties. So it's not just yummy and enjoyable, it will help people.
Right, I love it.
Well, I guess we do have to get into some darkness, but before we go full dark, I'm wondering, what your sort of childhood was like and your upbringing and how you got into where you ended up exposing the horrors of China.
Oh, interesting. There's two aspects to that I think are probably the most appropriate. One is the professional side, which is, I guess I've always been an artist. I've always wanted to be an artist. I grew up drawing and painting and sculpting and carving. Music, had to choose between fine arts and music, and ended up choosing fine arts as my primary, though I've never been able to let music go. And that led me into production, which led me into film. And I think in film, I get to use all my skills, from visual arts to writing to music. And I really love that brings all those things together. And then, but with my upbringing, I grew up in a very, so my family actually escaped communism in Russia.
Wow.
In 1918.
Oh.
And my great-grandparents and my grandparents. And then they went to China. So in China, my father was born, and my mother's family lived there as well, but they left there before she was born. But my father grew up and lived in China for 14 years. He was there during the great famine, and he refused to talk about it when we were, when he was alive. So I didn't really know much about it. And then he escaped communism. He had to escape when he was a teenager and came to Australia. And then, I grew up in this family that has really strong Russian roots. So I've never been to Russia, but I grew up speaking Russian language, going to Russian classes, Russian school every weekend, doing Russian dancing, Russian music. And that culture really stuck with me. It was part of my Australian life, but also my cultural side. But it's only just recently that I've been able to, when I've seen what was going on in China, that I actually had to go back and look at my own roots. Wow. And look and see, like, what happened to my family in Russia. And my husband's family, actually, they escaped former Czechoslovakia, communism again, and came to Australia when he was 7. And his parents my in-laws told me more about their experience under communism than my parents did, actually. And my grandparents, my parents, they didn't want to talk about it. It was just too horrible, and it was past. And I kind of deal with that a bit in my book as well. And so, like my work now, I really am grateful that I've been able to connect my roots and make that part of the story, because I find it's really important for me personally, as well as I think it also, in some ways, it helps people to kind of access a very, what may be otherwise a really difficult, scary kind of topic. But when you see it through the eyes of someone whose family has lived it in so many ways, then it's just a different way to access the story. And so I had to access it in different ways. And yeah, it's been really fascinating. But that was my upbringing, and looking at what I was told and what I wasn't told, and then needing to fill the gaps. So it's been an interesting process for me.
What a fascinating parallel between the personal and the impersonal, and like the micro and the macro, and the inner and the outer, and these things. It's so interesting sometimes how life throws that at us. Like, here's all of these things. Oh, they just happen to all align, and. Yeah. And to see that from so many angles. And so you really, I imagine when you're kind of researching and, filming and writing or doing whatever you're doing for the films, it is coming from that personal place. And maybe that's why I cried like 15 times when I was watching this movie, aside from the fact that it's just horribly full of really difficult things to consider humans going through. But I'm sure you bring that touch to it, which really helps the affect be contagious in a good way.
Thank you. Yeah, it's it was a real process to get to that point, because when you're making a movie, there's so many ways you can tell a story. And I also edited the movie, which it's kind of common for documentary directors to also edit the movies, because the editing is really the writing process in a big way. So I did the edit, but it's really challenging to get a story out in a way that moves people. And not that, like, I'm really against things like marketing manipulation and all this type of thing. So I really want it to be authentic. But I really needed help. And I had a story consultant come in, and he just helped me craft it in a way that it's not a way to make people cry at all. No. But it's a way to tell the story that people can actually understand and connect to, because, I spent so much time with the family that are featured in the movie, and I became a bit too close to the subject. And so really needing to like separate myself from their story, but at the same time, I'm the one that knows it the best, in the crew. So I'm responsible for getting that across. It's a real kind of fine line there, but the key is to make it, I've got to be moved by it, definitely. Otherwise, if the people making it aren't moved by it, then it's not going to move anyone. And people say that Hollywood or the movie industry, it's an emotion generating business. That's what we do. And that sometimes I really hate that, because I think I'm not trying to manipulate anybody here. But I have a story that really moved me. And if I can express it in a way that others can feel what I felt, then I think it would be valuable to them because it was valuable to me. So it's really kind of I have to get that kind of clarity in myself that I want to use these production techniques that, we know work through Hollywood, but I don't like the manipulative side of it. And I want to be able to bring it to people in an authentic way. So I'm really glad you had that experience when you watched it, though we, not trying to make anyone cry, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, there's something necessary about that. And I think that, people connect to causes and, purpose and opening their eyes to something and, shedding ignorance through emotion. And if you can't connect at that level, then it isn't going to impact you in any way that's going to change, you and the world. And that's, I think, the hope with this is that people will, at the very least, become, less apathetic or at least knowledgeable. I think a lot of people are just ignorant accidentally to some of these things. But, also shed some of that possible apathy or possible feeling, like there's nothing you can do. And I think you do a really good job, helping people settle into the concepts and the ideas and then bringing the emotional in, but also offering some lens of hope at the end, which is really key too. Because if we feel hopeless at the end, then we're also going to give up. So it's a really fine line to walk. And I think you do an excellent job at that. It's truly a piece of art.
Thank you. I think the hope is essential in any kind of art. I mean, sure. It's not like, you want to look at things through rose-colored glasses, though I am, I'm generally an optimist, but I do go back and forth between the two because I'm really, I tend to be really, I want to be really realistic and practical as well. But I do want to look for the good in things. I want to find that silver lining. And it's just really fortunate that these people, these two characters in the movie, their whole family really are optimists. And
despite reality.
I know, like you see their faces, that's real. And some of the early cuts of the movie, it was really challenging because we did screenings with people and they would say, why are they smiling?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's how they are. And they said, but it's the sad part, why are they smiling? I'm like, because they're Chinese and this is how they're brought up. Yeah. And it's still like, but why are they smiling? It's like, that's just no. So it's really challenging to, it was challenging that way, but the other way, they actually are genuinely hopeful. And when they go into that dark place, they really don't like to go into those memories. They're very, very painful. And a lot of the times they would put a smile on to hold themselves up. And that's how they were facing the world. And sometimes that was a facade in a way. And I learned to got access to them. I learned how to read them more and more and realize the times when that was a genuine smile or when that was a smile because they were uncomfortable. Or, the brother would do that a lot. He smiled a lot when he didn't know what to say. And so it looked really inappropriate that he would be smiling while walking around a prison. Was we took them to Alcatraz Island and he's walking around a prison 1 month after being out of China.
Yeah.
And he's got a big smile on his face. And, a lot of those scenes never made it into the movie because people wouldn't be able to get that. But they really did, in their hearts, they had that genuine hope, and that comes through at the end. But it was a matter of distinguishing between the real happiness and positivity and when that is just something that's there as a shield to protect them from going into that those dark memories, which they have a lot of dark memories, but they put that wall up, and we had to really help them find the strength. I mean, they had that strength, but we had to gain their trust, and they had to be willing to take that shield down in front of the cameras and let us in and show us how they really felt and what really happened. And that took a long time. They gave us access very easily, very early on, but to get past that shield took time. But I think that time is what makes the story that you watch in the movie a lot more, really authentic, because it is real.
Yeah. It's really real. And the times you do see that emotion come through, I feel like for me, at least, it's even more impactful because you do get that sense that like, this isn't something that, whereas other people might feel totally fine going on Jerry Springer and crying about whatever. Like there's people who are very private and it's very internal and it's not something you necessarily share. And so it has a lot more potency in a way that really speaks to you. You can feel it.
Yeah.
Well, so for people who have no idea, do you want to give us kind of your description of what Falun Gong is and how you became sort of attracted to that specific issue or movement or, you know,
Sure.
Yeah, cultural movement.
Yes. Well, the two characters in this movie, Yifei and Leo, brother and sister, they practice Falun Gong. And so that is, but actually not all of their family do. So that was something that really drew me to their story in particular, was there's this Falun Gong movement that started in China in 1992. And it came during a time when Qigong, for anyone who's heard of, Qigong practices, it's an energy practice like Tai Chi. Tai Chi is a form of Qigong. I guess people who are familiar with yoga, where there's the physical aspect, the stretching and everything, but there's also the spiritual aspect as well. And so it's a form of what they call in China, what it translates to as self-cultivation. So you're not going to a temple, you're not going to a church, you're not part of a required structure or a hierarchical group, but you are internally trying to improve yourself. And that's a really interesting concept. That was something when I first learned about Falun Gong, it's also called Falun Dafa. I'd never heard of self-cultivation. I, dabbled in Tai Chi and yoga, but only the physical side, just for, getting, stretching and things like that. But I never really looked at the spiritual aspect. So I found that fascinating. So I actually started practicing Falun Gong myself in 1998. And so I was, I was just doing my thing, and I really enjoy doing it. There's 5 sets of exercises, and there's a book, and it teaches the 3 principles: truth, compassion, tolerance. So I really liked that. But it was just a thing that I did, myself. I'd go to the park in the morning and practice, or do it at home just whenever I want. There's no one sort of telling me what to do, or no one checking in to see if I've gone or not. Plus it's free. So you just get just watch the videos online, learn the exercises, and then there's groups, join a local group in the park, but go or not go. So it's really casual and informal. But then the Chinese Communist Party cracked down on it. Said there's too many people. There was their estimates were 100 million people practicing, between 70 to 100 million people practicing. And that's in a period of 8 years, that many people are practicing. And the biggest issue on that is not just the numbers. I mean, the numbers, that's big, because that means at the time they had about 60 million Chinese Communist Party members in the country. So then 100 million Falun Gong practitioners means, there's more. That's a potential group, even though it's not a structured group. Potentially, that's more people than the Communist Party doing something that is not under the control of the Communist Party. So that's warning for communist dictators. So they started to pay attention, and probably a big deciding factor on the crackdown, not that I think it's justified in any way, but officials, Chinese Communist Party officials, were practicing it. So there was people who were party members. A lot of people were party members and still are, though a lot of leaving the party now. But at the time, a lot of them were party members, and they were also Falun Gong practitioners, because Falun Gong doesn't care what political affiliations you have, because it's nothing to do with politics. You do what you want. You vote for, well, you can't vote in China,
No.
but if you want to be a party member, just be a good party member. Who cares? So it's really, doesn't have any political requirements. So so the Communist Party, the dictator at the time was Jiang Zemin, and he banned Falun Gong, and he basically said, eradicate it in 3 months.
God.
And so I'm, I was in Australia at the time, and I'm practicing at the park. And then I come home one day, and my mom says, so this Falun Gong is now banned. I'm like, what? What?
How? Yeah.
What's the world's gone insane? How do you ban truth, compassion, tolerance?
Yeah.
It didn't make sense. How do you stop people from going to the park to do yoga, right? Something that looks like yoga. There's no money involved. How do you stop me, right? Someone who's pretty independent. How do you stop me from going to the park and doing this stuff? So that's what happened in China, and to me, it was just bizarre. And it got worse. People started to die because it wasn't that, you know, they said basically it was going to be eradicated in 3 months, but, you know, it didn't. And because it's not like a hierarchical structure where you just take out a leader or you get rid of the funding and the group dissipates.
Yeah.
So they arrested the people who were the organizers, and the organizers are the ones that turn up with the music boxes to the parks. Okay, you take them away.
As close to the leader as you can get. There isn't really a leader, but
they're an organizer, right?
Yeah.
You know, they turn up every day. They bring the music, and they'll put a sign up and say, "Hey, free classes here." But if you take them away, most people have music at home, so you just play the music yourself. So then other people stepped up to the plate and said, "Well, I'm not stopping just because you took the person away with their music. I've got my own music." So how do you get rid of something like that? And so people started to stand up and say, this isn't right. And the two characters in our movie, Leo and Ife, they had seen this before. So Ife was in China. She was a very high profile journalist, Communist Party member. She was interviewing the top leaders of the party whenever they came to her state. So she's, you know, her and her husband were top level officials. If they got pulled over for a speeding, they're never going to get a ticket. Never, because you just show your media pass. They call it like you're a little prince if you have a media pass like that in China. You're not going to get into trouble for anything. So she had been a journalist in 1989 when the Tiananmen Square massacre happened. She saw what happened. She knew what happened to the students. She wasn't there when they were killed, but she had joined the protests, and she became really disillusioned after that. And then, you know, but she kind of put it aside, kind of forgot about it, because you have to live, right? And you're living in a communist country. You kind of just go on with things. And no one in her family was killed in 1989, but it left a bad taste in her mouth. But then in 1999, 10 years later, when the Communist Party outlawed Falun Gong, her sister was arrested. And her sister, Ke was already practicing. Ife wasn't even practicing. She wasn't interested in Falun Gong, but she knew her brother and sister practiced. So she just saw what they did. She knew what they did was good for their health. And then they got arrested for going to Tiananmen Square saying, please don't kill us. Please don't arrest us. We think you've made a mistake. So Ife saw what was going on, and she felt it was really wrong. And so she started, out of this sort of righteous indignation, she said, I'm not having any of this. I'm going to stand up for my family. And because her parents also practiced, and she started to practice. She started to be a part of the group. She wanted to understand them. And as she got more into it, she felt that this was something really good. And one day, she herself went to Tiananmen Square. She held up a banner that said, Falun Gong is good. She was arrested, put into prison. So were her brother and sister, but she escapes. Her brother doesn't. He's put into jail for 13 years, and her sister is murdered. So you see what happens to these three siblings? And if I can just add one more story on top of that arrest story, is mine. So I went to China in 2001. I didn't know Ife or her family, but I knew that there was going to be a protest. I knew there was a couple of guys from America who practice Falun Gong, and they said, we're Americans, we're Caucasians, we're going to go. If you want to come, keep it secret, but come on this date. Don't blow the cover. November 21st, November 22nd, 2001, 2 p.m. at the flagpole in Tiananmen Square. Be there. I found out, I turned up, and there was 36 of us from, I think, 13 countries.
Wow.
And I didn't know these people. And I went with a friend that I did know from Australia, but I didn't know anyone else there. And we were all arrested. I had my hair pulled, I was beaten, I was bruised.
Wow.
not badly, but I
Mm-hmm.
was beaten up and I was put in a basement jail cell for holding a banner that said truth, compassion, tolerance. That's it. 3 words.
Wow.
Truth. And I didn't break any laws, right? No laws. And I was kept in the same basement prison cell that Ife was kept in.
Wow.
And
That gave me
like
chills.
it was just amazing. Like when I heard her story and she was telling me what happened to her, I'm thinking that's what happened to me. And she described the prison, and I'm thinking that's the same prison I was in, and same basement cell, but she was taken to another underground prison. I was taken to a plane and deported. So the difference between her family and my family was the color of our skin and our nationality.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, wow, if I had Asian skin, even if I was Australian, they probably would not let me out. But because I'm white, they let me out. But Ife, she's not, she's Asian. They kept her there and they would have killed her. She was very, very close numerous times to being killed, and she knew that. So, my gosh, like when you see that, you think, wow, how do you tell people this story? It's a really difficult story to tell, but, having that experience did drive me to want to find ways to tell people about it, use the skills that I have, professional skills and creative skills to get the story out there. So that's the long answer to how I got to this point, and hopefully that explains. I think you asked me what is Falun Gong. I hope I covered
Yeah,
that.
yeah, no, that was the question. It's perfect though. I mean, because I want people to really understand if they don't know already that, for one, Falun Gong, like you said, is a series of movements and like a spiritual understanding, basically. And those 3 words, right? Truth, compassion, and tolerance. I mean, who in their right mind is not for those things, and it's so simple. And like you said, there's no organization, there's no political purpose at all. And so I just, people have to understand that, like you said, no crime, this completely peaceful spiritual movement that's very simple and not even organized, and yet this brutal treatment. And so, she was taken, you were taken and beaten. She was taken and beaten and maybe almost killed multiple times. And her sister was actually murdered. And I mean, I don't know. And there's so much we could go into that's so horrible. But what happened to her body that was strange, and why do you think that it is happening or has happened? If you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, and I don't want to give away what's in the movie, but I think
Yeah.
when you see it, and I want just for a heads up for everyone that watches it, it's not a gruesome film.
No.
Even though it's people say to me, "Oh, you make scary stuff." I'm like, well, there may be scary subjects, but not in a scary way. I'm not into horror
No.
films, and I'm not against them, but I'm not into them, and I don't make them.
Yeah.
But I'm not afraid to look at a scary subject and make it palatable, because I think we can.
Yes.
And so this story with the sister, yeah, I get asked this a lot. So when I met Ife and her family, she's telling me her whole story. She told me her sister was killed, murdered in a labor camp, and that was awful. Like, damn, that's awful. And then she tells me that the body is still there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, translator, what's going on? And yet the body's still there. And I'm like, how do I tell somebody that? Because I haven't seen the body.
Yeah.
So this part isn't covered in the movie. So I like talking about this part, is like how, because in the movie we have all the admissions to prove that it's there,
Right.
but we can't, all the nitty gritty. I don't bother putting into the movie. But I said to the family, look, okay, I'm believing you, but it's not enough. I'm a journalist here as a documentarian. I got to know this. So they started giving me paperwork. And I had official documents from the Chinese labor camp, and I verified that from many sources that labor camp exists. It's still there now today. I have photographic records of its development since 2001 up until present day. We have live footage of it filmed specifically for our movie. We had investigations going on, undercover footage inside. We have admissions from the labor camp director there currently, as well as numerous sources from the people that were there at the time. And even one of the staff is still there now. And she says, yeah, we know this person. We know she was dead. She was part of my team. She was on my, in my brigade. And so the weirdest thing is that, well, just the whole thing's weird, because that just wouldn't happen here. And people say, that wouldn't happen in China, because I thought I knew China. I was arrested in China. I've been studying it for 20 years. My dad was born in China. I thought I knew China. So when someone tells me that there's a body that the Chinese Communist Party couldn't cremate, and that it's still sitting in the morgue now, and the Communist Party is paying every year to keep it there, I'm like, you're right. That's impossible.
Yeah.
But that's what happens in this story. And I found that this is not the only case. This particular family has inspired many, many others. And maybe others just happened incidentally. But because this family in our movie is so high profile, they are so well connected. And in China, it's all about connections, because it's communism. Communism breeds corruption. Yeah. Or corruption breeds communism, whatever way you want to look at it.
Both, yeah.
There's so much corruption going on. So it's who you know. There's nothing to do about values or doing what's right or wrong, or what we think's right or wrong. It's about who you know and how much money you're going to pay, and who you're going to stab in the back to get what you want, and how you're going to protect yourself. It's a very stressful way to live, and that's how they live. It's a real stressful place. So this family refused to have their sister's body cremated. And the labor camp did everything they could to try and get the family to sign the paperwork to do it. And that sounds very bureaucratic, right? But what it comes down to is that the person that puts their signature on the cremation papers, that family is going to hold them to task. They're going to hold them to account. And no one at the labor camp has been willing, or at the morgue has been willing to do that, because the family is so well connected to all the high profile officials, to everyone in the media, thousands and thousands. Everyone in that city knows this case. So they have made sure that if anyone touches that body, everyone's going to know. And the person who signed the paper and let the crematorium burn the body, they're going to burn. And that is like, wow. Yeah. This is how corruption works. And this is the people of China using the corruption against the communists. And I'm like, whoa, this is amazing. We couldn't get all that detail into the movies, but we got the emotion and all that side into it. But that's how it works. So I thought I knew China and communism. No, it blows my mind every time. So, there's so much more that I don't know, but I've been learning a lot. And that's the story of the body, which is still there to this day. It's now not 16 years. It's now almost 20 years. Like it's still there, and we know it's still there. We have all the proof that it's still there. It's just crazy.
It is crazy. Like, humans can get so insane. I mean, you're holding onto this body for 20 years, and it's insane. I've never heard anything so strange, I feel like. And it's but like you said, it really, just unveils China and the sort of monstrosity of this bureaucratic, corrupted system that's so entangled and disgusting. And I loved Kerfei's story, except for how horribly it ended. But I loved her. Someone said something like, prisoners are pretty easy to control, but Falun Gong prisoners aren't. And Kerfei was the worst. And I was like, go Kerfei. But no wonder they targeted her, right? And also because of her family. I'm sure back then possibly they were like, well, if we get her to recant or give it up or something, then maybe this whole family will, and things will start to sort of collapse. And it just made me so proud of her.
I really connected with Kofei myself too. When I heard her story, I just had the chills, and I just thought, wow, what a strong woman, what an amazing character, and just like having those kind of role models. I mean, that's who you want to see in a movie. That's who I want my daughter to see in a
Yeah.
movie. And it's like, wow. And I want my son to see that, that in a movie too. And I think, isn't that great that it's the sense of, of course there's a fatality at the end, but sometimes, we need to have that bittersweet to have that reminder. And I think just that people saw her as a beautiful person inside and outside. But they also saw her in the prison, what she was able to forbear, really showed her strength of character. And she just, I think she felt that, what I connected with her is that she had to sacrifice a lot, but her family respected that in the end. And I think it's really hard for families to, because they're the ones closest to you. And she could have just signed the papers. But then again, I met a lot of people who did sign the papers, who didn't do what Kofei did. And that is very painful for them because they regretted it. And it's kind of leads to this downward spiral where they're told, just sign the papers and we'll reduce your sentence, or sign the papers and you'll get out. But it's never like that. You sign the papers and then they give you something else. And then you do the next step, and then they make other people sign the papers. And then they may eventually let you out, and then they monitor you, and then they take you around and they say, well, you now have to go on television and tell everyone that you've signed the papers. So it takes you down and down and down until you feel that you don't have the strength anymore to maintain your own will, your own sense of conscience. And where maybe you felt that you could just sign against your conscience once, but then when they make you do it again and again and again, it starts to really break your heart. And I saw so many people it really felt like their hearts were broken, because that was a very painful point for them, because they went against their conscience of what they thought was right and wrong, and they were forced to do it. And they could have said no, but some of them knew Kofei and they said, I wasn't as strong as her. And they were very much inspired by her, and they feel now still inspired by her. And I think making this movie is a heavy going process. You're hearing all these stories, and I would need to really decompress after these interviews. But there was a lot of these people who would say, this is the first time I've told anyone this. And they would just end up pouring it all out. And I'm thinking, wow, if this is what I'm supposed to do, I'm really grateful for it, because I know I'm going to survive. I know I'm going to see the other end, even though this is heavy. I'm okay. I will be okay. But these people had been through hell, and I felt like some of these interviews for them were very cathartic. And when they watch Kofei's story now, there's another element of catharsis, just to know that they survived what she didn't, and there's still hope for them. Nothing's lost. Okay, maybe they have some regrets, don't we all? And they came out the other side. So I feel there's just this, the story just affects people in so many different ways and on so many levels. And it was really fascinating to connect with people all on these stories and see how they related to Kofei and her story. It definitely affected me in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, what a healing process for everybody to go through, in the creation of this and the washing of this and the sharing of this. And how empowering too, for people who maybe felt like, there wasn't a lot of hope, or that maybe eventually you want to give up, and that this kind of reinvigorates perhaps and reminds people like, okay, there's other people, we're all together actually in this, and we all have a little part to play in it. And what a beautiful thing. And it's just so, it's so heartbreaking to think of that bullying, you know, really like devilish tactic to try to force someone to do something that they don't want to do. And then once they do, it's like you said, like now you know that you can make them do what you want to do. And so why would you stop, you know? And it's so manipulative and horrible because you do, I can't imagine being physically tortured and you know, hopefully I never have to, and not in this way, you know, and I can't imagine the temptation to want that to end, you know, like, of course I'm going to sign this paper or whatever you say. But then, you know, if you know that what's after that is just more and more and more degradation and giving away parts of yourself, like maybe then you rethink that a little bit more. I don't know, but I'm not going to judge anybody for making any choice in that situation, because, you know, I've never been there and I wouldn't want to. And I'm just amazed that anybody goes through it and comes out the other side. And I wonder if now is a good time to play this clip that is pretty short, but it's pretty powerful. And I just, for people who don't understand, I think it's a really important set of images to have. So that's okay with you. I'll play that now.
Absolutely.
Okay.
而且四平监区10个监区，每个监区都有法轮功学生。他们就用那种抻床，把人抻成大字形，都是这样抻，在床上抻死。最长时间，床上待了55天，只剩一把骨头。保外就是他们急保，说人不行了，赶紧给家送回去。到家很快就死掉了。 说惨无人道，都很难忘怀。
So that, you know, the people in these clips are, you know, because I think some of us think like, well, maybe if I was there, I would just kill myself. And it's like, they don't let you do that, you know, and well, maybe I would just starve myself until I die. They don't let you do that either. And they clearly are willing to let people get to the point where the closest I think we can come in comparison is unfortunately the Holocaust. You know, I think that's the only time, for me at least, that I've seen these exact images of just fully emaciated bodies that are also imprisoned and not free. And we had a world war, you know, allegedly to like stop this. So why do you think we're so apathetic to this Holocaust in China? Do you know what I mean?
Oh, totally. It's a question that I ask myself a lot. I've given a lot of thought. People have asked me too, and the biggest reason that I've sort of conclusion I've come to really is that, and the reason that I ended up writing the book that came out of the movie is that we had the Nuremberg trials after, you know, what happened in Nazi Germany, and we're taught generally, maybe not so much now, but I know growing up, I was taught Nazism is bad.
Yeah.
And look at what Hitler did. You know, look at who's responsible. All these people, anyone connected to that. Look at what the German people have been through and what they've done to, there's that national consciousness of never again among them. And I think that just is testament to the strength of character of a nation, and what I think the German people are just phenomenal and amazing to be able to come through that and recognize what's happened and be able to put that into their history and their culture and move forward in a positive way. Communism has never had any trials.
Yeah.
Communism has never been found guilty of anything in any country. It's been trialed. It's an experiment, and people say, well, communism doesn't exist. It's true. Communism actually doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You know, China is technically not a communist country. It's a socialist country. The Chinese Communist Party's constitution says very clearly, we are a socialist country. We are heading towards the goal of glorious communism. Okay, they don't have glorious in their constitution, but they have communism there. The other words are all there. So it's the isms all kind of get mixed up. There's Marxism, there's a whole lot of other isms in there. But essentially, I'm using communism as a bit of a catch-all, and there's a lot of variations out there, but it's because no one has ever been held to account. And you look at what or who has killed the most people in our human history, it's not Hitler, it's the Communist Party. And you look at more than and it's not even the wars. We've had shocking wars that have killed so many people, but the Communist Party has killed more people than all of our wars combined. And we're not taught that. We're not taught that in schools. My kids aren't taught that in schools. I wasn't taught that in schools. Even my parents didn't want to talk about it because it wasn't talked about in schools. It's not a common thing. You don't say those things because the communists might come after you. They'd had the communists chasing them for generations across multiple countries. So they didn't want us to have the weight of that fear. So they just wanted us to grow up in a free society where they'd finally found freedom. They didn't want to talk about it. So it's because we don't talk about it, and because those factors have been allowed to grow, and China has 70 years under a communist party. Whether people may say, well, it's not a Marxist society because you say this about the economy. It's a socialist country, period. They say it themselves. And it's evolved, of course. We can't expect it to stay the same as what Marx wrote in the 1800s. Things evolve, technology changes, the economy changes. So things keep changing, but the political system in China has not changed since day one, 1949. And it is still the same. A few words might have changed in the constitution, but very few. Essentially, it's the same situation, and it's based on Marxism, Stalinism, Leninism. More Leninism than Stalinism. But you kill. That's how you maintain control. You create fear in people. That's how you maintain control. And you maintain control over everything, no matter what. You can, if people want more money, if they want more shiny things, give it to them, as long as you can keep control. You can call it anything you want, as long as you keep totalitarian control. And that's what they've done. And this is a massive experiment, and it's been allowed to grow. And China, under the Chinese Communist Party, we've witnessed it, and we've seen them. They have sponsored socialism, communism in so many other countries. And it's a real danger because it's just killed. Nothing else has killed that many people. Not even a pandemic has killed that many people as communism. And we don't talk about it. Yeah. So that's my answer. That's my long answer.
No, it's a great answer. It nails the exact problem, that we don't talk about it. We don't teach about it. When we do, there's this idea sort of that we have to respect cultural differences. And, there's very stupidly, there's these people who will call you racist if you criticize China. And that's why I pointed out in your intro that you love Chinese people, just in case there's any silly racist, I think they're the racists, watching this who want to try and say that. And so it's like, well, if you're not allowed to talk about it, and when you do, you're somehow racist, even though it's not a race, it's a government, it's a ruling class, then how would you ever get to this point? And there's also just this very strange resistance, I notice at least in the US, and maybe you notice it too, that people have this resistance to admit that China could be that horrible. And I don't understand that at all, because I feel like it's been pretty obvious for a very long time that system was very oppressive. But this is what we're seeing, and it is all wrapped up in that, resistance to even talk about it. And it's kind of amazing, therefore, that there are so many people that you found who had come straight out of the system, and many of them, officials and guards and people in the party who were willing to talk about it and able to speak so freely to you about it, and why do you think that is? Because I know that the threat they must face is immense.
Yeah, they didn't speak to us that freely, and they didn't speak to us without risk. And we interviewed many former Chinese Communist Party officials, and out of the few dozen that we interviewed and that were willing to speak to us, there were many, many more that wouldn't. And there were some, there's really brave Chinese people. My goodness me, they're gutsy. There was officials in China, a few that were willing to speak to us, but we had to say no, because you just can't protect them. And then, if they're still in China and we do an interview with them, they're going to be arrested. That's their, and if it's not them, their family, their kids can't go to school anymore. They're going to lose their job. And they might say, well, look, I don't care. Well, okay, that's their call. I cannot willingly be a part of that. I just don't want that blood on my hands. It's really dangerous. It's really life and death for these people. And inside here, we interviewed people who had left China, and most of them already had some form of protection in their new countries in the West. So most of them were relatively safe already. There was a few who aren't, and they're really gutsy guys and a woman. And they were willing to speak, but it's not easy. Some of them just were really uncomfortable to do it, and we had to really convince them that we're going to represent them fairly, and we're not going to ask too many questions. And for them, it's very difficult to speak, especially the officials, because they are not used to speaking freely. They are not used to, one of the guys, he says to me, I thought we were going to do a rehearsal. You're asking me questions? He didn't say that to me. Yeah. He said to the translator, his friend, and I could hear, I knew what he was saying. He said, she's asking me questions. What happened to the rehearsal? I don't know how to answer this stuff. I need a rehearsal. This is, in China, you don't speak freely. You are told what to say. You're prepared. Before you go out and talk to someone, you go through your head mentally, okay, I can't say this. I can say this. If I say that, that will work over here. If I don't say this, I need to pay this much. It's very, very complicated and stressful. Whereas here, we're like, hey, just tell me how you feel. They're like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
They cannot answer that question. And I think, what you were saying before about this racism thing, I think the biggest problem is that the Chinese Communist Party has been able to convince a wide majority of the population of China and a vast majority of us that China cannot exist without the Chinese Communist Party, and that the nation of China, which has existed for 5,000 years, amazing culture, amazing people. They've been through so many other forms of disasters and challenges and successes.
Truly.
The Communist Party is trying to, and has essentially made us believe that China and the Chinese people cannot exist without them. But essentially, it's kind of parasitic, where it's latched onto this country, this beautiful nation, these beautiful people, and they've said, we're in control and you will do as we say. And so it's different. It's really this very totalitarian regime. But we have been taught to believe that if you criticize the party, you are criticizing China. So I knew very early on that I'm going to be called anti-Chinese. I'm going to be called racist. My dad was born in China. I love Chinese food. I love Chinese people. And I'm telling stories about Chinese people and helping them tell their stories. But I knew that, the irony there is that would be seen as anti-Chinese. And that's why I feel the distinction is really important, that we understand in the West that China, and to us it's logical, right? But we have to remember it. China is not the Communist Party. It's like us saying that America is the Democratic Party. It's not. You know, okay, they're in power right now, but is it the Democratic Party, or was it the Republican Party? Of course not. But in China, it is the Communist Party. And if you say anything otherwise, you are anti-China. So that's where we got to call that out and say, that's dumb.
Yeah.
That's illogical. That's irrational. And really be able to pull that apart and say, that's not a racist issue. That's just a different form of logic. That's communist logic. That's not free thinking. So we have to, I find that the communist thinking has really penetrated a lot. And the Chinese Communist Party has been very effective in bringing that across. But we have to dig that out and really just let our rational minds, our free thinking minds, value them and use them and call it out and say, that doesn't make sense. And I think we should be able to say that. And that's essentially what I've tried to do in the book, is just call it out and say, it doesn't make sense. Explain to me what it is, but I don't have to accept it because I want to stay a free thinker in a free country. I think we've got to be able to question things.
Yeah, I would hope that we always can. And I know there's one thing that is not allowed in China. And I think it's a really good distinction to make, in that using that terminology even of distinguishing and saying, okay, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP is what we're, criticizing, and maybe leaving the word China even all the way out, leave China out of it, whatever, just talk about the CCP. And I've seen a lot more focus on it. I guess focus is not the right word, because I don't see it on social media. I don't see it on any media. I don't think we're allowed to criticize China here, subtly. We're not allowed. Obviously we can, because we're here doing it, and that's very lucky, and I'm grateful for that. But I have seen more people, for example, the recent event at the White House on the 6th, I guess there was a large contingent of people just holding signs saying, like, stop the CCP and, stop prosecuting or oppressing Falun Gong. And I was like, that's cool, because I feel like I used to see it in like 2004, 5 a bit, and then I just have not seen it since then until right now. So I have a little bit of hope that that's kind of coming back up to the surface, and that people are starting to notice again and remember. And I wonder what you think about this, that possibly part of the reason why is people are starting to notice that the CCP and various aspects of that culture have sort of infiltrated into the West, and that maybe China's coming for us.
There's, this is when, it's sensitive, isn't it? Because there is so much, you got to follow the money.
Yeah.
This is how communism works. You follow what happened. I've got a good friend from Venezuela, and she has told me so much about what happened under President Chavez there, and just to see how that country that she grew up in was super wealthy and then was destroyed. And we may not call it communism, but that's called, that's called socialism. And so I think, again, this sort of terminology gets mixed up, but we've got a lot of examples. And look, in Venezuela, follow the money. You see who funds the dictators to carry out the bad things that hurt the people on the ground. You follow the money with China. Who is receiving money from the Chinese Communist Party? Who is giving them money? And now it's really hard not to buy things from China. I mean, okay, sure. Okay, I'm how do I avoid buying some appliance if there's nothing else, if it's only made in China, or if the made in America ones really, the price is more than I can afford. I'm not criticizing for people for buying made in China. No. I do try and avoid it when I can, and I like to buy local because I want to support local. But, there's big money out there, and that big money is very connected to China. China knows, now I'm saying China, but it's the CCP.
Yeah.
The CCP knows, and yeah, they have a big budget for foreign influence. But the media in the West, particularly in America, has not been willing to cover those stories. And that is pretty scary. If they're not willing to cover the stories that are, and it's not just covering, okay, right? They're just completely shutting down, like even a question about, say, someone receiving large sums of money from the Chinese Communist Party, from Chinese corporations, which we have to understand that in China, if a business or a corporation is successful, they are connected with a CCP, period.
Yeah.
You cannot be successful in China without being connected to the CCP. All the people I interviewed in my book testify to that. And those are high profile Chinese Communist Party officials. And yeah, so anyone receiving money or doing business with China is in a way supporting the Chinese Communist Party. But when you get to the top level, we're talking millions, billions of dollars. And those stories are just being pushed down in the media. We know that the Chinese Communist Party is behind that. And you just got to follow the money. It's scary because they're pulling a lot of strings behind the scenes, and it's not good for our country.
No. And I just I can't imagine being in a position of power and like selling your whole country out. Just and especially to, it's kind of similar to what we were saying earlier, where like once you kind of break somebody, well, now you've broken them and you have them. And it's like, I think some of these people think like, oh, well, they're coming anyway, they're going to be the power, I'll get in good now, my new masters or whatever, in some level of their mind. But they're not, it's not like they play super fair or they are honoring, anything. There's no values there. It's just this very cut and dry, like you said, it's all about control. And so if you're in the way of their control ever, even a little bit, even if you did favors before, it doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna make it. And so it's just crazy to me to watch people sell out their entire country full of people to another country, especially one that behaves so disgustingly. And it reminds me of, another thing that came up in the film, which I ask myself all the time, no matter which country or whatever we're talking about, when it's when it comes to things like torture and stuff, I'm always like, how do you get people to even do that? Because I can't imagine doing that, and I don't even want to imagine it happening at all. But I definitely don't think that there's any way that I could be made to do that to other people. But there's people doing this all over. So, what's your take about how those things sort of combine to explain to us why people end up doing this?
I asked the same question of many people, and one thing that stuck with me was, I remember because I interviewed victims and then I interviewed perpetrators because I want to understand both sides.
Yeah.
And I remember a victim saying to me that it was really hard for them because they would see the perpetrator on the street in China, the person who tortured their friends at the labor camp, who tortured them.
Wow.
And they would see them coming home from work. And one day they asked them and said, how can you do this? And even just, that victim, that person, I just think is just so amazing to be able to go face to face and not want to just punch them in the face, right?
Yeah. Worse.
To go face to face and try to talk to them and try to understand them and try to help them. And this perpetrator, this person who worked at I can't remember if it was a prison or a labor camp, it was one of the two, and they said, it's my job. And when they walked on the street, they looked like a normal person. That's what the victim saw. They didn't see them as, some evil demon walking down the street with wings and fangs. But they said they remembered them from inside the prison, and that they looked really super aggressive, super angry, super, whatever you need to be to hurt people very, very badly.
Yeah.
And these people are put into a really difficult position because they're going to lose their jobs if they don't do this. And one of the perpetrators, he was the head of a labor camp in China, the head of the labor camp, not just a worker. He was the director of a district of labor camps, not just one. And he was put into a position where a 15-year-old girl was tortured, where her skin was burned terribly, and not just on her private areas, on her genitals and everything. It was just shocking. A 15-year-old girl. God. And he disciplined the officer who did that by moving him, just moved him to and transferred him. But he was no longer able to prevent it because he tried to speak out against it. His camp started losing funding. So his funding was being cut. He was being penalized because he wasn't carrying out the torture, and transforming people, getting them to recant to the numbers that the Communist Party wanted. So what did he do? He left. Not everyone would think to do that. Not everyone would be willing to leave their homeland and go to a foreign country. It's a big deal to come to a foreign country
and
you don't
live
know the
there
language
permanently. Yeah,
that's right. And leave your family. And it's not that you just leave everything behind, it, everything you know, and it's unfamiliar and it's strange and food's weird, all that stuff. You are then seen as a traitor. You're seen as a traitor to the party. And that's just heartbreaking because you know that you're not. And it's not a traitor to the party, a traitor to your country. But you know that you're not. But the fact that you can't convince your friends and family back home that you're not a traitor, that you're a good person, is really painful. So, all these people have really suffered a lot. I found the perpetrators suffered just as much in many ways as the victims. And the other way that they have survived is to become this, the word they used is the walking dead. In Chinese, the literal translation is walking corpses, walking flesh. And I chose to use walking dead because I thought, well, I get that. I know what that means. But these are the perpetrators, they had to disassociate what they felt was right and wrong, what they felt was right, what they felt they should do to people from what they actually had to do. So they were forced to lie, to hurt, to kill, to torture, to deceive, all of those things. And to do that, they had to disassociate their conscience from their reality. And that some did it with alcohol, some didn't survive. There was suicide rates are very high. And others, they just cut themselves off. It's really awful.
It's trauma. Yeah.
Trauma.
Yeah, and that's really, it's absolutely true, and it's really good to be honest about that too. Like exactly what you said, the perpetrators suffer as much as the victims because, again, we can't judge people in those positions because we don't know what they've had to go through and what the stakes are, and we can't imagine it for ourselves. So we just can't judge them, and we can hope that we are never in that similar situation and never have to make those choices. Because I can't imagine just how much you do have to disassociate in order to get through, whether you're torturing other people or not. I think like most people in a society like this, probably to a significant amount, have to kind of disassociate at some level in order to go along with a lot of it. And it's, I think a lot of people underestimate too, and you've kind of alluded to it throughout the interview, how much people are programmed and conditioned, and we all are to some extent. Our culture conditions us to behave and think in certain ways, whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not, and so, and going to another culture really brings that out. You're like, wow, this is completely different, and people think different, and they act different, they behave different. And so it's a part of humanity to do that. But in China, there's a whole other level to it. When you add in these various levels of threats, if you don't do this, here's the consequence. If you don't do this, here's the consequence. If you do this, here's a little reward. And it's a bit more intense than a lot of our cultural programming tends to be. And so, it comes out a couple times how people have to deprogram themselves. And it's not a metaphor. It's like truly you've been programmed and mind controlled, and you had to go fully into that. And like you said, disassociate and be this thing in order to survive. And so it's really hard to watch that and to think about that process as well. And what's your take on deprogramming and getting out of the mind control of it all?
It's really, it's interesting because, my family came from Russia, right? And that's where the brainwashing experiments really started.
God.
Under Soviet times. And it's this concept of being a group of intellectuals being greater than everyone else. And this is a Marxist socialist. This is a fundamental, people say Marxist is an economic system. Wrong. It's not, economics is part of it, but a really fundamental part of it is that a belief that the majority of the public is not able, whether it's intellectually or just emotionally or whatever, to make good decisions for themselves beyond maybe some basics, and that they need to be guided by some sort of big brother authority, which is essentially a class of ruling elites. And that started under the Soviets in Russia. Yeah, it was probably funded by Wall Street if you follow the money.
Yeah, seriously.
Right. And then it went to China, and it's just developed there 70 years, right? So what Russia was doing was already pretty scary if you look at what they did to kids, dogs, humans, in the early 1900s. Then you go to China, 70 years of that. You think they haven't stopped it?
Yeah.
They have honed it.
And they've merged technology with that, right?
Oh, yeah. They know it really well. So it's absolutely naive for us to think that the Chinese Communist Party has forgotten its ancestry in the Soviet Union. They themselves say we are Marxist Leninists. We follow Marxism, Leninism. And that is that there's a ruling elite and that they know better than everyone else, than the masses, the populace. I mean, these are the words that the Communist Party uses all the time. It's not like they're old school for us because, our media doesn't talk about the masses or, classes and things. We just change it to something else. We call it, identity politics now or whatever, but it's still pitting class against class, race against race, minority against minority. That is the other aspect of Marxism, socialism, classes, where you have class warfare. Okay, it's not cool to use those terms now. And when we hear that, we can say, well, that's just outdated. That was, from the Cold War. Yeah, well, we've just changed the terms. That's all it is. And we're useful idiots if we help push that agenda forward, or if we know about it and don't say something about it. So, the deprogramming or the programming inside, the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP culture in China is all pervasive, and it's very well honed, and it starts it from birth and follows them to death, and it creates the Walking Dead. It is that scary, and it's real, and it's just a lot easier to say, I don't want to think about that. Let's just turn on the television.
Or to pretend like it's not coming, because China has a stated goal of taking over the United States, at least. And I think Australia, and we are seeing them right now continuously, always, and for however many decades, pushing into the countries that border them and calling them China. Now they're China. They've always have been China, actually. No one's allowed to talk about it anymore. And that has never ended. And so I don't know how, if you're a logical person, how you can look at all of that, what's going on within China, where it came from, what the goals are, how pretty ironclad it seems. I feel like if I were a Chinese person, I would be pretty hopeless that there was any other way, or maybe I would never even consider, but that there was any other way, or that I could escape this in any way. And it's coming. I mean, I just, again, I think people feel like if you talk about that or you point at it, that you're somehow irrational, or like you I don't know. It's weird to me why people don't see it, but I feel like it's pretty obvious.
I think that's, in a way, it's part of the programming, cultural programming as well. Is it that the CCP has a very clearly defined. I think that the term they use propaganda as their term. They've changed it to publicity now, but just in terms of the choice of words for what they think we will find palatable enough, because they
still a tomato, even if you call it like flour.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we fall for it. We say, oh, they no longer have a propaganda department. Good for them. They're no longer communists. They just changed the sign to say publicity department. Go figure. Yeah. So we got to stop falling for it. And it really is, it's a lot. It is hard to go against the status quo, because the status quo, when you look at mainstream media in America, you look at most of them have ties to the CCP. They get a lot of funding, advertising money from the CCP. So they are required to do what the CCP wants. Like if you follow, like for example, with the Falun Gong persecution, New York Times, the editors, I think it was 1999, they went to China. They had meetings with the then dictator Jiang Zemin. After that, they never reported on Falun Gong for many, many years. There was a series of reports a few years ago, but in one year, but otherwise they would not talk about Falun Gong. So if you follow the control of the media, usually again follow the money, follow it back to who's paying, putting the money in the pockets, where are the advertising dollars coming from. A lot of the mainstream newspapers will have a China Daily insert that is directly from the CCP propaganda department, paid for by the CCP, and intellectuals read that. Some people won't even, they won't bother reading it. They'll see it as propaganda, but it goes in their head that Communist Party is strong. They're in those big newspapers, their billboards are in Times Square, that they're all pervasive. Don't say anything against them because they're bigger than you. That's the impression that it gives. And it makes us feel afraid, because that's how communism rules, is through fear. But there is that sense of hope. There is a lot of Chinese people who are, there's probably a huge majority. There's the regular Chinese people, and then there's the officialdom. So I've interviewed a lot in both. And I thought that they would be similar, but they're not. The regular Chinese people aren't that politically involved. They've really been, they might complain about what's going on, but they don't understand the real details of the operations. They couldn't even explain it to us when we asked them. So that's why we sought out the officials. And they are completely twisted, because they are the closest to the regime. They're the arms and the legs. They're the hands and the feet. They make it work. Without them, the regime is nothing. The regime cannot exist without them. So they make it work. And they are so brainwashed by the party to either be just completely absorb everything, or they hate it so much but they can't do anything. They're in such conflict. So they're the ones who really know the system very, very well. But on both sides of these Chinese people, there's this phenomenal movement. In Chinese, it's called Tuidang, which is, I think it translates roughly to quit the party.
It's like walk away.
So it's basically the walk away movement. And that started quite a few years ago in China, and the CCP is furious about it. And there's like 300 million people that have quit the party. They've walked away from the party.
Wow.
And if anything, it is absolutely cathartic for them, because when I've interviewed these officials, many of them have said once, they said we didn't see hope before, or we didn't understand the regime like we do now, and quitting the party is just a massive release for them to know that they can step away from it, because all their lives they've been under that control, that mental control. And now they're feeling that they can. One of the women officials, she had tears in her eyes when she said this. She said, all the philosophies and things that were instilled in me by the regime were taken away. And you could see that lift on her face, but there's also that struggle of like, wow, I was really brainwashed. Yeah. And but that just seeing them find and express that sense of mental freedom was like, wow. and they really I think that movement is extremely powerful, this Tweedang movement, and I think it's only going to keep growing, and it's really providing a lot of hope to Chinese people just to know that China is not the CCP, because they've been taught since birth China is the CCP, and now they're saying, oh, it's not. And oh, I can tell someone else that, whereas before you couldn't mention it even if you knew it. If you had a brain and you could work that out, a free brain, you couldn't say it because you'd be in prison. Whereas now, more and more people are saying it, and they're saying it to each other, and they're saying, did you know you can quit the party too? And this walk away movement is phenomenal. So that was one of the biggest hopeful inspirations that came out of not everyone that we interviewed, but so many people that we interviewed, is that this is the hope for the people of China and the country of China, is that this walkaway movement is what's going to restore humanity to them, and that's pretty amazing.
How beautiful. It's so powerful when we can have something that simple, you know. It's easy to imagine, like, oh, walk away, you know, and like you can write it really quickly, you could like stick it really quick on a wall somewhere so someone sees it, and it's really beautiful to imagine that. And when we release this mind control, or we come out of like an illusion, like you said, it's kind of like, holy crap, where was I just now? Like, what happened, you know? But it is so freeing and empowering, and that little, even tiny little empowerments, you know, like this like ripples out into the rest of our lives, into the people that we know. And so watching that grow, I'm sure, is really hopeful. And it makes me think back to the Falun Gong movement itself. I don't think it doesn't sound like it, there's no evidence that it was ever intended to, you know, like overthrow a government or do anything but empower people to feel connected and healthy and, you know, spiritually aware and present in themselves. But it's kind of fascinating to think about. It probably does actually do a good amount to sort of defray the worst of the effects of the CCP, because, you know, if you have to disconnect from yourself in order to carry out these things, or in order to go along with this regime, connecting within yourself is probably going a long way towards letting you get rid of that, get that out of your life, and disconnect from that, be more connected to yourself. And so it's kind of interesting that I doubt that that's why they ever targeted it. You know, I think it's much more like you said, it was numbers, it was making them, you know, there's way more people doing this, whatever. But it's interesting that, you know, they feared it for some reason, and maybe they had good reason, because it is really empowering.
Yeah, that was a conclusion that I came to my book, actually, and it was only at the end of writing it. I never really thought about it before, because, you know, I'd investigated this myself because I needed to understand it. And like I said, I went to China to see for myself, like, what was going on with this persecution and this group that, you know, I was a part of by just doing my own thing at home. But, you know, what was really going on there? And what I'd been saying, and what I still believe to this day, is, you know, like, if Falun Gong wanted to overthrow the Communist Party, they would have done it.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
100 million people?
Yeah.
It's done. Right? But,
Truly.
you know, for anyone who reads the teachings, which are actually all free online, there's no secret teachings that you got to pay for or go to some special classes for. They're all just free to download off the internet. So anyone can access the teachings. So I always just say to people, look for yourself. And, you know, even though I practice, I have done my research. I've done my homework, and I've read piles and piles of Communist Party documents and books and speeches and rhetoric. And I've read all the Falun Gong teachings, and Falun Gong teaches no politics. And, you know, don't try and get in there and take power, because that's not what this is about. It's not about finding human power. If, you know, basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but my understanding of it is that, you know, the teachings from Falun Gong is, if you want political power, you know, that this is not the place for it. You go and do that away from a self-cultivation practice. Self-cultivation is about essentially wanting to achieve some form of spirituality. And in Chinese, there's a translation for the term consummation, where you will actually, your energy will be able to, reach a fruition, so that your body becomes strong, your mind becomes strong. You can, traditionally they talk about enlightenment, and where your mind can open up. And I mean, we just know that the mind has so much potential and possibility, and we can achieve that through so many ways. And of course, science is one way, but it's not limited to just what we have in the textbooks. And I think there's so much in traditional spirituality that we can learn from. And I think, these ancient ways of trying to achieve enlightenment and improving the body, I think are pretty powerful and worth looking at. So, but none of those were, if you look throughout history, none of them were trying to seek political control, because political control is so small compared to having control over your own self. But that was my conclusion in the book, is that actually that's what is, and I don't know if the communist leaders thought that at the time, but really I think that is the most fearful thing for a totalitarian regime, is to have people really become free.
Yeah.
And once you know that the world is really so big, and that really I'm just a pretty small ant to know that the universe is so big, the world is so big, there's so many layers to what's going on, and there's interdimensionality and energy, and the brain, we just haven't unlocked all the potential of the brain. When you really think about that, actually political struggles are just really kind of small, and who cares who's in power in politics? just let me be. So for Chinese people to start thinking that actually politics doesn't matter that much, that is a scary thing, because communism is all about politicizing everything, where the party rules everything from food to education to style and fashion and entertainment. And cultivation is about not caring about politics at all. So if Chinese people stop caring about politics, they're not going to fear the Communist Party. So yeah, actually, I think that was my conclusion, that the free thinking and expansive thinking is a big threat to totalitarian regimes, because people start to realize that that people's lives are precious, and because we have our mouths, that's what the communists, and I get quickly thrown into a prison. You're kidding me. So, and my in-laws who escaped
of taking that from someone, but cascade down in some of these thinking where it's coming from, that people are like, oh yeah, we should censor this and have less and less and less of these rights that we.
It's that black and white. And yeah, communism doesn't want a level playing field. They play to win, and there is no. I think that there is a middle ground with communism.
Started this talk, and they are kind of fired up about it, and they can maybe support
people themselves is movement. There's an English either .com or .org, but reject CCP. I think understanding, because right now